Okay, so this week's task is for you to watch me making some custard creams. Obviously we're talking about biscuits at the moment, and this would have been one of the recipes that we were making in school. You would have probably watched me demonstrate it to you, just like I'm about to do just now, and then you'd answer some questions on it, like obviously Rune just now, and then we would have ordinarily made it. I will put the recipe in the section below if you do want to make them, that's great, and if you're allowed, obviously just make sure you have permission from whatever adult is in the house, and there's maybe somebody there that can keep an eye on you if you do want to make them. So custard creams, we learnt last week that they are a very, very popular biscuit. Apparently in 2007 they were one of the most popular biscuits when they did a little survey, but a lot of people don't really make them from scratch, they just buy them from the supermarket, so it's been quite interesting just to see how they are made. Obviously I've done my personal hygiene already, so I've washed my hands ready to go. I've taken off any jewellery that I've got because I don't want to get anything caught under it, don't want the metal to heat up and then burn myself. I've tied my hair back, I've made sure I'm ready to go basically. So first step that I need to do is to put the oven on, so I'm going to turn that to 180. The reason that we do that is just to make sure that it's going to be at the right temperature when the biscuits actually go in to be baked. If the biscuits go into the oven, into a cold oven, then they need to spend all that time heating up, they don't start cooking straight away. Let's say you put them in for 20 minutes and you include the heating up time in the 20 minutes, then they're not going to be baked by the time the 20 minutes is up. If you put them in at the right temperature, so if you put them in when it says 180, when it is 180, when the oven is 180, then they're going to be cooking for 20 minutes and then they will actually be ready. First step I'm going to do is to cream the butter and the sugar together, so that basically means make a paste out of the butter and sugar. So I have got some margarine here. If you're making this, I would make sure that you've got margarine that has 70 grams of fat per 100 grams. It'll tell you on the label there how many grams of fat is per 100. You do get 40 grams of fat per 100, but that's too watery for what we want it for. It's not going to hold its shape. So make sure you've got 70 grams per 100. We are going to be using 100 grams of butter or margarine today. This is actually margarine. That we are using. So 100 grams, that's going to go straight into your bowl. Because I've got electric scales here, I can just put my bowl straight on top of the scales, make sure that it's 0, and then make sure I've got exactly 100 in there, and it'll tell me on the wee screen when it's exactly at 100. Obviously the scales that we have in school are what's called analog scales, and those are the ones that you get the dish on top, you'd put the ingredients in there, you make sure the dial goes to 100, and then you would put that into your bowl. These ones are quite good because I can just then put that back to 0, and then I can put my sugar in to the same bowl. And obviously it's cutting down on dishes that I then need to do. It's going to make it nice and accurate because it can tell me if it's like 49 grams or it is actually 50. With the analogue scales we can only really get like 55 would be the next kind of little line up that would tell us how much we're out by. It's really important to make sure that you've got accurate measurements when you're weighing things, especially when you're doing baking like this, because it's such a fine balance between all of the ingredients that even if there's one ingredient that's too much, then it'll have quite a drastic effect on what the outcome of the dish is. So if we put in far too much butter into these biscuits, then they would be really greasy, they wouldn't probably come together right. If we put in too much sugar, then they would have like this sugary crust, or they wouldn't bake correctly either. So we need to make sure that we've got the exact right amount of each ingredient that we need. We're then going to cream that together. So we have done this technique before. You're basically smooshing it up against the side, making a paste out of the butter and the sugar, and stirring it until it's nice and light and fluffy. You shouldn't be able to see any of the sugar crystals because they should be all mixed in with the butter by the time you're finished. The reason that you do this is to try and add some air in, so the butter and the sugar works together to trap some air bubbles. That's why we mix it. The faster you mix it, the more you mix it, the better. That's the main reason why we are doing this. It goes lighter because of the air that's then being included into the mixture. done. We're then going to add in our milk and our vanilla essence. So we need our measuring spoons. So again, we have these in school, we have lots of different sizes of them. In our desk in school we have ones that are 2.5, 5 mils, 7.5 and 15 mils. So out of that you can make pretty much almost every number that you might need. Obviously doing a wee bit of maths in there, but you can add that up. You can do multiple spoons, you can be able to use different spoons, whatever it might be. Now this vanilla extract that I've got is quite strong, so I've only put in half of the amount of vanilla essence. I'm only putting 2.5 instead of 5 that it says. I'm then going to get 20 mils, so for 20 I'm going to need a 15 mil and a 5 mil. And I'm going to carefully pour my milk. I'm going to do this over the bowl just in case I do spill any. It's going to spill into the bowl and not all over my table. So that's 15 and then 5. Making sure it's level, obviously. If you only half filled that, although it says 5 on it, if it's only half full then it's only going to be like 2.5 or 3 mils. It's not going to be the 5 and that's not going to create an accurate measurement. I'm going to pop the milk back in the fridge because we need to keep that chilled at all times. I'm also going to put the butter in the fridge so that that's going to stay chilled and not go off. And then I'm going to carefully stir the milk and the vanilla essence in. Make sure I've got all the ingredients off the sides. Obviously there's no point you spending time accurately measuring all these things and then leaving half of it on the bowl. So I'm going to make sure that it's all involved. There we go. Now I'm going to sieve my flour and my custard powder, so I'm going to sieve for that. Got my sieve, I'm going to put that over a plate. So I'm going to sieve it onto a plate and then I'm going to add it in gradually because I don't want to have too much. So put the plate on there, put the sieve on top, make sure it's at 0. And then I'm going to put my custard powder in here, so I need 50 grams of custard powder. This is what's going to give it the flavour. That's one of the reasons that the custard powder is in here. Obviously they're called custard creams, so they've got the custard flavour in them. This is also going to add something to keeping all the biscuits together, so it's going to give it a bit of structure. That's exactly 50. Lid on just so that there's no moisture gets in there. When you're storing any of these dry ingredients, you need to make sure that they've got a really tight fitting lid, just so that there's not going to be any moisture gets in, there's not going to be any bacteria gets in as much as possible, and they stay really fresh for when we need them. I'm going to add on to that 150 grams of plain flour. Still into the sieve because I've made sure that it's at 0 before I've started, so my scales are only measuring the flour at the moment. There we go, exactly 200. Put the lid back on, just make sure you're keeping nice and tidy. And you're going to sieve this onto the plate. Now when you're sieving things, you are adding in air to the mixture, you're getting rid of any lumps. If there's any bits of flour that we don't want, let's say, this is obviously it's white flour, but if we had like brown flour, we might not want the bran bits of it, which is the kind of harder bit. So we might sieve that to get all of that out. Main reason that we are sieving this is to make sure that we've got lots of air in there, because as plain flour we are making biscuits, we don't want them to rise too much, but we want to put some air in just so they are going to have a little bit of lightness inside them when we're eating them. So it's dropped through the air, it's dropped from the sieve onto the plate, and then obviously it's added air in there. We've made sure obviously we've not have any lumps. I'm now going to add this in gradually, so I'm going to add a couple of spoonfuls at a time. The reason that we add it gradually is because it's easier to stir. Makes it a wee bit easier to mix together. We can see if we actually need all of that flour and custard powder. We're looking for it to go into a ball of dough, so if it gets into a ball before we've used up all the flour, then we might not need all of it. Give that a good mix, make sure there's no lumps. Add in a few more spoonfuls. Making sure we're stirring it, we're pressing it up against the side of the bowl, making sure the flour gets right the way through the mixture. Obviously going to make sure that I've got all my flour in there because of, as I said earlier, went to all the trouble of measuring it out properly and making sure that you've got the exact right amount. You want to make sure that you're actually going to use it all as well. Use the back of my spoon and press it up against the side of the bowl, and hopefully it will become a ball of dough. Just like that. Okay, I'm now going to use my hands just to shape this, and we're going to shape it into a kind of rectangle cylinder type shape. I don't really know what you call that. So I'm going to make sure I've got that all out. I'm going to put it onto my desk. I'm going to shape this into, as I say, a kind of cuboid rectangle type shape. And then I'm going to chill this, and then once it's chilled I'm then going to cut it into slices and then bake them as the biscuits. So we're not going to actually cut them out, like we're not going to roll it out and cut it out into rectangles. We're going to do it a slightly different way, and that's going to mean that we don't have as much wastage over our biscuits. If yours is a little bit sticky just like mine is, I'm just going to get a little bit of flour, put that onto my worktop, roll that in the flour just so it's not going to stick to everything, and then I can finish off shaping it. Like so. So it should have flat sides, a kind of long shape, so that then when we cut it we're going to cut maybe centimetre thicknesses all the way along, so that we can get our biscuits that are the same shape as the custard creams. That's about the shape we're looking for. I'm now going to wrap that in cling film and put that in the fridge for probably about half an hour to an hour, just to let it chill, and then I'm going to come back and cut it into the shape that we need. Okay, so that's the biscuit mixture been in the fridge for about an hour. Obviously I've used that time just to tidy up my desk, make sure there's no flour all over the place. It's really good to have a nice clean workspace, keeps you organised, keeps all the bacteria away. I've kept out my flour because I'm going to use that just in case it sticks to the desk. I shouldn't imagine it will, but just in case. I've got my tray prepared, so I've got some greasewood paper on here so that the biscuits don't stick to the tray. If you don't have any greasewood paper, a bit of flour would do. You could sprinkle that onto the tray and that will help it not to stick. So obviously I want to try and keep this in the shape that it's in. It's in this sort of cuboid shape, so I'm going to carefully unwrap the cling film off of it. And then I've got a sharp knife ready to slice wee rectangles off. And then I can reshape them again if I need to on the actual tray, so that's going to go in the bin. Got my knife here, I'm going to cut off about a ½ centimetre thick piece. Roughly like so. I'm just going to flatten out a little bit on the tray and just make it a more even kind of shape. I'm going to I've got this cloth here just to wipe my knife every time that we go in between, just to keep it nice and clean. If it's any dirty or if it's got any of the mixture on the blade, then more mixture is just going to stick to that part of the knife. So keep it nice and clean. I'm also going to put some flavour on it this time, just so hopefully the mixture won't stick. Make sure your end is back in the rectangle shape, and then carefully cut all the way down. Place it onto your tray. These will grow a little bit in the oven, but not too much, so they can be a wee bit closer together. Just make sure they're all about the same shape. Another one, obviously we want to make sure that they are all the same thickness, and we have been through this before in class when you're in home ec before. The reason that we want to make them all the same thickness is so that hopefully they're going to bake at the same pace. If you've got like a really sort of fat biscuit and then you've got a really skinny one, then the skinny one is going to be burnt by the time that the kind of fatter one is baked. So we need to make sure that they're all the same thickness before they go into the oven. Okay, that's all the biscuits ready to go into the oven. As you can see, they're all a very similar size, they're all obviously the same shape, they're all kind of similar thickness, and there is an even number of them. So the way the custard creams are going to work, obviously there are going to be 2 biscuits with the filling in the middle, and obviously we need to make sure we've got an even number for that because they're going to be in pairs. You could at this point put like a little design on them if you wanted. Obviously if you've seen a custard cream you will have seen the kind of design that's on top of them. I think you do get the actual mould or like a replica of the mould to do that yourself if you really wanted, but I'm just going to leave them plain today, and I'm going to bake them for about 10 minutes until they're not going to change colour too much. We want to keep them kind of the similar colour, but we're going to bake for about 10 minutes until they are kind of set. They'll still be a little bit soft because that's the way biscuits are. Once biscuits come out of the oven they kind of harden up a little bit and then they become crispy and crunchy how we want them, but they're going to go in for roughly 10 minutes. That's the biscuits out of the oven now. As you can see, they're nice and golden. They're just golden around the edges there. They are still a little bit soft, which they should be. That's good. They're not stuck to the paper, which is good as well. And they're not too brown, which is good. So I'm going to take them off there and put them onto a cooling tray. Obviously I've got my oven glove here that I've taken it out of the oven with just so I don't burn myself. I use that to put it into the oven as well, just in case I burn myself on the shelves in the oven, because obviously they're really hot. I'm going to leave them to completely cool down, and then I'm going to make the filling and I'll show you how to sandwich them together. So that's the biscuits, nice and cool now. That's been there for probably a couple of hours. I'm now going to make the filling for them. So for that we're going to need some margarine again, some icing sugar and some more custard powder. So I'm going to put my bowl onto my electric scale. I'm going to put in 75 grams of margarine. You could use an electric mixer if you've got one in the house to make these. We'd probably use it in school if we had access to them. So 75 grams of margarine. That's going to go back in the fridge just so it doesn't melt. And then we're going to have 150 grams of icing sugar in total. But I'm going to add in half at a time, so I'm going to do 75 grams first, mix that, and then add in another 75 grams. 75 to begin with. The only reason that I'm doing this is to make it a wee bit easier to stir together. If you've ever tried to make butter icing before, it goes really crumbly before it becomes into a paste, so if you do it this way then it's just a wee bit easier, especially if you're using a wooden spoon. So we're pressing the butter up at the side of the bowl, trying to incorporate all of the icing sugar into that and mix it all together. more you mix it, the creamier it's going to be, the more air you're going to get in, just like we creamed together the sugar and the butter earlier on. The more you mix it, the better it's going to be. And then I'm going to add in another 75 grams. Make sure it's at 0 before you start. Icing sugar does go absolutely everywhere. A way that you can sort of minimise that if you don't want to clear up your mess afterwards is having a towel over the top of your mixing bowl, and that will kind of stop the dust going everywhere. If you've got an electric mixer, then you definitely want to be doing that because it will go absolutely everywhere. Okay, so 75 grams another time. So that's 150 all together. Whenever you make butter icing, it's always half the amount of butter that it is to icing sugar. So a kind of 2-to-1 ratio if you were in maths. And then again I'm going to press it up against the side of my bowl. Because I've put it in 2 halves, that was nice and easy just to mix that all in. And that's it, ready. And then just to add some flavour, obviously we want our custard kind of flavour in our custard creams. I'm going to add in a 15ml spoon or a tablespoon of custard powder. So I kind of round a tablespoon, just put that in. And that's going to add, it's going to add a wee bit of colour, it'll give it a kind of yellow tinge, and it's also going to add a bit of flavour just to finish it off. And that's it, ready. I'm going to use a spatula just to get it all off the side of the bowl. Obviously I went to the bother of making sure that it's all accurately measured, so I want to make sure that it's all getting used. And then I'm going to sandwich my biscuits together using this as the kind of glue to stick them together. You could use a piping bag if you wanted to be really precise. I'm just going to use a spatula just because it's a wee bit quicker, it's a wee bit easier. So you get kind of dollop. Just pop that in the middle, spread it out just a little bit. You don't want to spread it out too much because when you put the next one on, so find one that's roughly the same size. When you put the next one on, you're going to press it down and it's going to kind of squish out a little bit. Just going to clear that up. Go all the way around. Back in the bowl, and that's it, ready. That's them all finished. I do have some spare icing left here, so I can put that into a little airtight tub, and then I can use that to make some more maybe later on if I want to, or put it onto a cake or something like that later. These are going to go into an airtight tub as well, so ideally we're going to eat them in the next sort of 2 to 3 days, as long as they're kept in an airtight tub, in like a tub like this that's going to, the lid's going to go on really tightly, keep all the air out, then they'll keep for a few more days maybe, if they needed. So if these were getting made for something like a party or something like that, you can make them a few days in advance as long as you keep them stored correctly.